Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Diana Matthews. I am a professor and librarian at the Lawrence W. Tyree Library at Santa Fe College. And today our workshop is going to focus on how to research current events. So if you are researching for a speech or an essay and you want to address something that is still happening, that's very new, or it's unfolding as we speak. How do you do that, especially if you have some requirements for research in your assignment parameters? For instance, your professors told you that you need to have some library resources, you need to have some peer-reviewed journals. How do you do that? So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So as a note, during the pandemic this summer, the library is currently closed. The building, anyway, is currently closed. But the librarians are still providing resources and research help from home. We're all working from our houses, and we are available for help pretty much all week, and you just have to call us, email us, send us a chat, lots of different ways to contact us. We also have a lot of online resources that still remain available 24/7, even though our physical resources in the building are currently inaccessible. All right, so after this webinar, our goal is that you should be able to identify some reputable news and web sources, employ strategies for fact-checking, and then identify some library databases that you can use to get background information and related information, as well as get those resources that you need to fit those assignment requirements. So our first tip is to locate reputable news sources. So obviously news is going to be one of the first things that you're going to want to look at when you are researching something that is very current. So something that's happening, things that are developing, something that just happened in the last day or last week. Things that are, again, unfolding. So for instance, at the time that I am recording this, obviously COVID-19 is a very big story, and things are happening every day that we find out about, or new updates. Things like politics, as we are looking at the presidential election that is coming up, different things are happening there as well. And even things like the protests. If you wanted to write a paper or an essay or a speech on that, things are happening, and different developments are occurring pretty much hourly for some things. So news are one of the first places that you want to look. But you do want to find some reputable news sources. With the internet, there are so many news sources out there that don't really do their research properly. They kind of put whatever they want there. They don't fact check. And so you might be using some of these news sources that are not as accurate, and not as neutral as they could be. So reputable news sources, obviously some of the major national newspapers would be great to look at. So the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post are some examples where they really have a good reputation for researching their stories carefully. If there is an error, they do acknowledge that, and they issue a correction or retraction. So some of these, again, nationally recognized newspapers will be a good source to start with. But you could also do some well-known local resources as well. So the Gainesville Sun is our local newspaper here in Gainesville, Florida. And they'll be good sources for more local things. So, how is COVID affecting Gainesville specifically, or Alachua County? You'll be able to get a more local view of things. There's also a few Florida newspapers that are that have a good reputation. So the Miami Herald and Tampa Bay Times are two examples of those. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the online versions of these newspapers are locked behind paywalls. Either all of it is locked behind a paywall, or you get a certain number of free views per month, and then you have to pay. As you can see here, the Washington Post, unfortunately, you can hardly get anything. They want you to subscribe in order to read it. And you should really never be paying for access to any articles because we have a lot of things available through our library to get you free information. And so one of these, we have a database called Newsbank, and this contains I don't even know how many newspapers from around the nation and around the world. So to get there, you are going to go to our library website and then click the databases button, which is underneath the picture of our porch. It's the second gray button. Once you do that, there is a list of recommended databases on the left, and Newsbank is listed in alphabetical order. You will need to log in with your Office 365 account if you're not already logged in. And so that's just your ID number at sfcollege.edu and then whatever your password is for the college. So Newsbank has a ton of really good information. You can search for keywords, names, events, or topics. During this time, they actually have a big area up top where you can see all the different news and informations about COVID-19. And they have these hot topics and special reports that you can also look into if you want to see what's happening with certain topics. And here's an example of an article that you would find in Newsbank. It's from the Associated Press News Service. It has the full article here. There is no paywall needed. And you'll see that your search result or your search terms are highlighted in yellow, so you can see how relevant it is. And then there's even options to have it read it to you. So Newsbank is a really great option to get some of these news articles, especially if you're running into those paywalls online. One caveat as you are going through different news articles is you want to be careful of opinion pieces or editorials. These are written by people who are trying to convince you of something or want to express their opinion. And they're not usually good sources to use for research because there's going to be some bias to them. So you can see here that this is an opinion piece by Senator Elizabeth Warren about her to-do list on fighting the pandemic. Now, it's not necessarily that any information in here, I don't know whether it's correct or incorrect, but it's her personal opinion about what needs to be done in this time of COVID-19. And so those opinion pieces might leave out certain facts or certain well-known strategies based on what they believe. There's actually been some controversy about some of the opinion pieces that were allowed to run, for instance, in the New York Times. And the editorial editor at the New York Times actually resigned over that. So you want to be careful of anything that is opinion or editorial. Now, beyond just newspapers, there are some really great news sites out there, and I'm going to show you just a few that I think might be useful that you might not be aware of. The BBC is from Great Britain, so it's the British Broadcasting Corporation, but they do a really good job with their news as well. They have a lot of news from the US and Canada, not just from the UK where they are located. And I find them to be interesting because they have a lot more neutral response to what's going on in the US. They're not kind of mired in the middle of it. But they aren't usually they don't usually have a bias to it. So it's just a very neutral outsider view of what's happening. And so I find the BBC to be a good resource to look at, and they're at bbc.com. One resource that I really love is called The Conversation, and they're at theconversation.com. So these are kind of news type articles, but they're written by people who are more experts in their field. So they're written by people who maybe are scientists or professors. And so they're able to put things in context with with their field and those standards. So one of the weaknesses of just general newspaper articles is that the people writing them, they might not be experts in the field. So, a newspaper reporter might be reporting on all sorts of different things from science and medicine, and they might not be experts in all of those areas. So the conversation allows you to kind of get a more insider perspective of how these developments or these news stories fit within the field. For more political information, Politico, which is at political.com, is another great website that provides some good information on political developments throughout the nation. And they do also include some state political news as is necessary. So you can see here that they're doing stuff on the Biden presidential campaign, the Florida teachers who sued Governor DeSantis for school openings and things like that. So Politico has well-written articles that are pretty neutral when it comes to political information, which is very difficult to find out there. Sciencenews.org, so Science News, is another great site, and this one focuses more on scientific news, as the name implies. So as things are released about different scientific discoveries and innovations, they might end up on this website. And they do have different areas that you can focus on. So if you want to look at, for instance, physics or space or Earth, they have these different topics up top, as well as things like science and society. Now, some news magazines are also can also be some good resources. The benefit of news magazines is they typically have the time to write longer articles, sometimes called long-form journalism. Most newspaper articles are going to be somewhat on the shorter side, but with magazines, they can really dive into things. Now, magazines typically come out monthly or weekly, so sometimes there's a little bit of a delay. Weekly isn't too long. But, with newspapers, they come out daily, so they're able to get much more current information. But the weekly and monthly news magazines are able to look into things and to really explore topics. So one of those that you might consider looking at is The Atlantic, which is at theatlantic.com. The New Yorker is another well-regarded news magazine. It's at newyorker.com. The Christian Science Monitor is a sort of cross between a newspaper and a magazine. They are at csmonitor.com. And although it says Christian Science, there's not really a religious focus. It is more secular, so you don't have to worry about that. And The Economist at economist.com is a news magazine that focuses a little bit more on economic topics, but there's a lot of things that are related to economics that you might not consider. So there's a lot of things, for instance, with COVID-19 that have economic repercussions and impacts. And so the Economist will still be focusing on those as well. Okay, so moving on from some recommended news sources, our next tip is to try to always locate the original source. So a lot of times newspapers and news sites may report on studies that are being done. So you can see here, this is from the Washington Post, and it says, "Study says yelling as harmful as spanking and disciplining kids. So what should parents do?" One problem with these kind of reports on scientific studies is they often overgeneralize. when you look at the original study, they may word things very carefully, like there may be a connection. Um, but news articles sometimes gloss over that wording to say there is a connection or this happens, when the study might say it only happens in these very specific circumstances. So whenever you are looking at a news article that's reporting on something else, you should try to locate the original source. So in this example, this is the actual article they're reporting on. It's got quite a title, Longitudinal Links Between Fathers and Mothers' Harsh Verbal Discipline and Adolescents' Conduct Problems and Depressive Symptoms. So you can see here they are focusing specifically on adolescents, and they looked at between the ages of 13 and 14. So that's quite narrow. That's not just children, or that's not all children. And so you really would want to look at this and look at the abstract and their actual conclusions before you could say that it actually is as bad as thinking. You're also going to want to use this for other things. So a lot of times, for instance, there might be news reports that President Trump tweeted something. A lot of these may be fake, or they are not really putting things in context. So go to his Twitter and find the actual tweet and see what he actually tweeted. Go to that original source rather than everyone reporting on it. And on that note, you should also always check the tone of what you're using. So especially with current events that are in politics, there's a lot of kind of clickbait sites that are writing articles that are intended for you to click on them. And one of the ways that they do that is to make you angry. So any sort of article where it's written to arouse really strong emotions, whether that's anger or outrage or disbelief, or even sadness, you're really going to want to look at that and step back and think about what they're actually writing about. These clickbait articles are not always using they're not always using the facts. They might be bending the facts slightly, or they might only be focusing on one thing and leaving out other things that would not support this, this claim of something that's outrageous. So especially as you are doing academic research, especially as you are researching for class assignments, whether that's an essay, a speech, a paper, you should always be using things that are more neutral in tone and that are not trying to make people upset. And that's just part of academic research. You want to have things that are neutral and balanced and that are using facts correctly. So as you are looking through and finding resources online, always, always, always check the tone. And then that is part of this tip here, which is doing some fact checking. As people are putting things out, again, as they're trying to arouse anger, suspicion, you should always double check what they're saying. This is happening a lot with politics now with President Trump. And now that Joe Biden is the Democratic candidate for president, a lot with him as well. People are putting out news articles or stories that say that they said something or they did something or there's something in their past. And before you automatically believe it, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, but sounds about right, you should always, always do some fact checking. One of the best places to go for that is Snopes, and that's at snopes.com. They are a really well-regarded site that investigates a lot of these claims. So for instance, one claim that was going around was that Trump tweeted that the Confederate flag is a symbol of love. And, if you read through their article on that, you'll find that that is false. He did not do that. Now, there were some other things he might have said that maybe got twisted or put without context, and that's going to show if it's mostly false or mostly true. And they will say if it's unproven, like they don't know for sure. They'll also help you with images. A lot of times images will be reused in the incorrect context, and so they'll tell you whether something is miscaptioned. They also look into urban legends as well, which can be a little fun. So Snopes is a good one to look at, especially as you're kind of maybe browsing through Twitter or Facebook and you see some articles from a family member and you're like, whoa, really? I always go to Snopes before I share anything. Another great fact-checking site is Politifact. That one does focus a little bit more on political fact-checking, but they kind of have a fun meter here that shows whether something is false, mostly false, half true, and you can see that the second one on the left is pants on fire, like that is really, really false. So they've got that on the front page, and then you can click through to read a little bit more about how they fact checked and what information they got that led them to make that conclusion. Okay, so if you have found something and you're not entirely sure where it came from, and you've kind of looked on Snopes or PolitiFact and you're not entirely positive if it's true or not, one tip that I always say is to investigate the source. What website or blog did you find this information on? And look outside the source. Google the name of the source and see what other people say. So for instance, there is a website out there called Center for Immigration Studies. And by the sound of it, it really sounds like it would be a great resource for information on immigration. If you go to their About page, they're going to talk about how they are doing research on immigration, and it sounds great. But you can see in the second box here, if you Google them, if you Google Center for Immigration Studies, they have a reputation for being very anti-immigrant. And you can see that it says that they have a decades-long history of circulating racist writers while also associating with white nationalists. So it's probable that they have a bias against immigration. Even their tagline says low immigration, pro-immigrant. So you can tell that they're not really going to want immigration happening. And so things that they're going to be publishing are probably going to be only supporting their point of view. So they might ignore information that contradicts what their ideology is. So things that you find on here are not going to say things like immigration might be good for the economy or other things that they might that might be true, but they don't want to show. So always look up outside of the actual site. Don't just go to their About site. Look up the name of the website or the organization to see what's happening. Because again, as we are doing academic research, our goal is to find neutral and unbiased information. And part of that we can do is to look for an official site. And a lot of times this could be a government site that has statistics or official information. One cool trick that you can do in Google is at the end of your search, you can put the word cite:/gov, and it will limit to official government sites. And these are mostly federal sites, but they could be some state sites as well. Some states and local governments have a .gov in their URL. It's really important as you type this in that there are no spaces. So if you look at cite:/gov, there's no spaces there. The colon kind of is sandwiched in between the site and the gov with no spaces. That's what you need to make this work. You can see that my search here was arrest statistics, cite:/gov. And the first three results you can see, first of all, they're all going to be from .gov sites. The first is from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is bjs.gov. Same with the second one. But the third one is from ojjdp.gov, which I forget exactly what that one is called, but it is another official government site on justice. So one more tip to keep in mind is that you should always find some corroborating sources. If you have found something online making some claim and you can't find that claim anywhere else, that should be a pretty big red flag for you, that maybe someone made this up and it's not correct. So always look for a few corroborating sources and make sure that those sources come from unbiased and well-regarded sites. If you're finding a whole bunch of these news sites out there that you've never heard of before, you probably are finding some fake news or a intentionally biased site that is kind of just farming out rumors or fake news in that regard to try to make people upset. Again, look back on that, looking at the tone, or to drive people to make certain decisions. All right, so those are some great tips for finding things online. And the things that you're going to find online through Google are mostly going to be, news, maybe some official reports. But a lot of times as you're doing these assignments, you do have specific requirements about needing to use some library sources. So perhaps your professor has said you need to use 3 sources from the library, or they've said you need to have a certain number of peer-reviewed journal articles. So a lot of library sources, a lot of these journal articles do take a little bit to be published. It can take about a year or so after an event before a peer-reviewed journal article is published. I'm going to talk to you about a few of these library sources and some strategies for meeting these assignment requirements. So our databases. I showed you Newsbank earlier, which would count as a library source. It is a library database, and those newspaper articles that you find would be library sources. There are some other databases that I think will be very helpful for learning about your topic and learning about what's happening in the world with your topic. So again, when you hit the databases button, you're going to go to this page here, and this is the full A to Z databases view that you're going to see. Newsbank is still on that recommended databases on the left, but we do have all of our databases listed on the right in alphabetical order. So these databases that I'm going to talk about, they're either listed under recommended databases or you just scroll down to find it alphabetically. So the first database I want to talk to you about is Credo Reference. Credo Reference is a collection of more than 1,000 different encyclopedias and reference works. Reference books and reference works are things like dictionaries, encyclopedias, atlases, and things like that. We do have a reference collection in our library, although right now it is inaccessible, so Credo Reference is a great place to go instead. I like to think of Credo Reference as a more scholarly Wikipedia. So if I know nothing about a topic, a lot of times I will go to Wikipedia to find out a little bit about it, and that's fine. But as we all know, Wikipedia articles can be edited with misinformation, biased information, etc. So Credo Reference serves that same purpose. It gives you these kind of summaries of topics, but they're coming from a more scholarly perspective. They're written by academics or by authors of certain books. And I find Credo Reference to be very useful for background information. So obviously, if I look in Credo Reference and I'm searching these books, I am not going to find things about this specific pandemic. I'm not going to find things on COVID-19. It's too new. They haven't written books about it yet. I'm sure there will be plenty of books in the future about it, but they are still working on that, and things are still unfolding. So they're probably not going to want to publish too much yet until they can look back at it overall. However, I can still find things about pandemics. I can find things about, let's say, the 1918 influenza pandemic, which a lot of people are saying is very similar to what's happening now. So I can draw those parallels. I can look up what a coronavirus is. There should be things on a coronavirus. And that can give me some background information about what a coronavirus even is. So in this example, this is a entry from a book. The book is American Governance, and the entry is about immigration. So as immigration news comes, recently the Trump administration had said that, for instance, international students would not be allowed to take only online classes. They would have to go back home if they did that. But then they undid that after there was a lawsuit by several major universities, including Harvard. So if you want to think to yourself, okay, what is all of this about immigration? Why is immigration such a hot topic at times? What's the history of immigration? You can look up that kind of general topic and learn a little bit more about how things developed. So this, for instance, you're going to see the first section is going to be talking about immigration and politics in the early years of the United States. And this is going to give you some good background information that you can use to set up your paper or set up your speech. So background information, very good for giving that history of a topic. Another really great database is called Opposing Viewpoints. And Opposing Viewpoints has a lot of different types of sources in it, and they focus on kind of these hot topics, these things that people debate a lot about. So for instance, this is their entry on police brutality. And they're going to have an overview at the top. And then if you look at the on this page, you're going to see all the different types of sources that they have. So there are a lot of viewpoints, academic journals, biographies, audio, which a lot of times comes from NPR, some websites, some regular viewpoints as opposed to the featured viewpoints. They even have 2 infographics, which is interesting. They have more than 8,000 news articles, so that's quite a lot. They have some primary sources, some images. They have articles from magazines. They have things from reference books. They have videos, and they have statistics. So you can see how this gives you a really wide amount of information. Even though this is a topic that, has been in the news recently, there's a long history of police brutality in different contexts throughout American history. So if you wanted to find out more about it, those reference books would be good, because the reference books are like what's in Credo Reference. You can find out information about it. This is kind of what it looks like as you scroll down a little bit on that page. I'm showing you here the featured viewpoints and the academic journals. So viewpoints are, again, going to be more opinion pieces. So you do want to keep that in mind as you're using them. I do find viewpoints very helpful when I am looking at things for a persuasive essay or speech, because it shows different areas that people are debating, so that you could maybe use those or rebut those questions as you're developing your speech or your essay. But the academic journals are what will be useful if your professor has said you have to have a certain number of peer-reviewed journal articles. And really, even if you don't have that requirement, academic journals, which are peer-reviewed journals, are kind of the best research that you can use. So if you are trying to convince someone of something and the only thing that you use is a whole bunch of websites, or websites and newspaper articles, that's fine, but your arguments will be much stronger if you have actual research to back it up. So if people are saying, oh, there's a lot more police brutality against minorities, get those actual numbers, find the research that shows that to help you with your argument and help you make a more compelling argument. So you can see here that it's showing the first 3 of these 23 academic journals. And Opposing Viewpoints doesn't have the largest number of academic journals, but it will have some to help you out. And so the first one is Mapping Fatal Police Violence Across U.S. Metropolitan Areas. Overall rates and racial/ethnic inequities 2013 to 2017. So there's probably going to be some really good information in here where you can have data to help you with your speech or essay. One more database that helps a lot with background information is CQ Researcher. CQ Researcher creates these really in-depth reports, and they have a report every single week. And so these reports tend to be a little bit more topical than you might see in other databases. You can see here that the report that was just published was about the pandemic economy. When will it recover from COVID-19? So that's pretty relevant for what's happening right now. They have reports back to 1923, which is pretty crazy. And you can find all of those if you want to see what people were saying about certain topics in the 50s or in the 60s. It can be really interesting to see how opinions have changed. These reports are really in-depth. You can see here that the pandemic economy report on the left has all of these different areas within the report. It's going to give you an introduction, an overview of the topic, the background that you need to know, the current situation at the time it was published, the outlook where they think it's going. They're going to have a pro-con where they're going to ask a question and there's going to be someone arguing yes and someone arguing no. And again, those are going to be a little bit more opinion pieces. There's going to be a chronology, which is like a timeline of important events in this topic. And then they'll have some short features, which is where they dive into one particular aspect. They also sometimes have maps and graphs, and a lot of times they will have these different graphs and charts within the entire report. And they always cite their sources as well with a bibliography as well as some footnotes. So I really like CQ Researcher as a way of getting these reports to help me understand a topic, and because they are a lot more topical than a lot of other sources. All right, and our final database of the day, Academic Search Complete. This is a database that a lot of students have used before, and it's a little bit more utilitarian, if you will. These other databases we've looked at, they usually have a lot of graphics. They make it a little easier to use. Not saying that Academic Search Complete is difficult to use, but you can see here that there's lots of options for searching, and it can sometimes look a little overwhelming. What Academic Search Complete is, it is a multidisciplinary database. So it has different articles from a variety of disciplines. It has things from science, from math, from technology, from religion, from politics, from education, all of these different areas, which means it's a good place to get started when you're looking for articles. And it has an option to limit to scholarly or peer-reviewed journals. And this is just if you scroll down a little bit from that front page, you'll have that option to check a box to only see peer-reviewed journals. As you're searching in our databases, you want to use as few words as possible. So instead of putting an entire question, you want to pick out those key concepts and search for them there. Everything should be full text. By default, you can see right above the scholarly peer-reviewed journals, the full text box is checked, and that should always be checked by default. If you don't check the peer-reviewed journals, you're going to see things from magazines, trade publications. Sometimes there's like one encyclopedia that's included in here, although those entries are usually pretty short. Sometimes you might see like conference papers and stuff like that, as well as a couple of newspapers. If you click that scholarly peer-reviewed journals, you're only going to see things from these academic journals, the things that are written by experts and that are a higher level. So here's an example, for instance, of an academic journal article This one is called The Economic Costs of Hurricane Harvey, Attributable to Climate Change. So a lot of times after a hurricane has just come through, like last year I remember when Hurricane Maria came through, students wanted to do speeches on that. And because it was so new, there wasn't as much research out there yet. Like, what effect did Hurricane Maria have on climate, or on, the sea life? We didn't know that yet because it had just happened. But we can look at other hurricanes and what they've done and make some generalizations. So in this case, we can see, how did Hurricane Harvey affect the economy? And we can use that information to kind of extrapolate how we might see similar economic costs to a hurricane that just occurred. So that's the important thing to keep in mind when you're looking for academic journals for a topic that just happened. You're probably not going to find a peer-reviewed journal specifically on this topic that just happened. Because again, it takes a while. They have to do the research. They have to write it up. They have to get it peer reviewed. And a peer review means it has to go to other experts in the field for them to review to make sure that it sounds like they use some good methodology, that they made the correct conclusions. And so that's what makes peer-reviewed journals so great, is that it has been reviewed by other experts. So because that can take a while, like I said, up to a year or longer, you're going to want to pick out things that can be extrapolated, other hurricanes, other immigration policies, or things about the history. So what is the history of hurricanes and how they usually affect sea life, for instance? What do we know about immigration and how it relates to university students? So kind of think about how you can draw those conclusions to get some good information to help you out. Okay, so those are just a few strategies and resources to help you out as you are trying to research these very slippery topics, the ones that are just happening, that are just occurring. Hopefully you have found some good strategies to use so that you can find some more reputable sources to help you with your research. But if you're having trouble, let us know. So as librarians, we are experts in research. We know what's out there, and we can help you with these different research needs, whether you need to find a specific type of source, or you're just trying to search for a topic and you're not sure how to do that. So we're available all week, Monday through Friday. We have an email, so you can email us at reference@sfcollege.edu. You can give us a call. Currently, as I record this, we are not yet back in the building. So what you'll do is you'll leave a message and then we will call you back. Hopefully we'll be able to get back in the next few weeks and then we'll be able to answer live, but we'll always get back with you shortly, so don't worry about that. We also have options for you to use our chat and to use our Zoom room, where you can drop into Zoom to ask questions, and that's going to be found on our library website. Okay, so any questions at all that you have, please let us know, and we are happy to help you with all aspects of research, including researching current events.